This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The African Union unveils a new partnership to accelerate COVID-19 testing in Africa. South Africans demonstrate against racism in solidarity with protesters in the U.S. and other parts of the world. And Libyan leaders applauded for accepting to resume negotiations for a political solution. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard and Tal live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight, I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Bit. Sudan begins talks for a bailout from the IMF as it faces rising inflation. And oil prices opened the week at a high after OPEC Plus agrees on production cuts. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Richard.
Thanks a lot, Uche. Let's get started with the African Union, where they have adopted a new partnership to accelerate COVID-19 testing in Africa. It aims to prevent coronavirus transmissions and death, as well as to minimize the economic impact on the continent. CGTN's Gerum Chala has more.
The coronavirus pandemic continues spreading in Africa. The death toll is also rising by the day.
194.
Besides individual country efforts, the African Union has devised a new continent-wide strategy dubbed Partnership to Accelerate COVID-19 Testing in Africa, PACT. PACT is aimed at defeating the COVID-19 pandemic soon enough.
The PAC initiative aims to prevent transmission and deaths and minimize the social and economic harm due to the COVID-19 by implementing well-coordinated actions and building strong partnerships to strengthen the effectiveness of the response across Africa.
Weekly, Africa is registering on average 5,000 new corona cases, South and North Africa leading with the most numbers. In South Africa, Egypt and Nigeria have the highest number of cases in terms of individual country. The African Union says under its new initiative, it has now established an anti-COVID-19 response fund to support member states.
We have money being transferred in the two accounts of this fund, and this fund is going to be used by Africa CDC also for the support of our member states. So we are getting the support from the Commission itself, from the member states, but also from the private sector in Africa.
Already $25 million has been allocated to Africa CDC, and more funding is coming on its way. On the other hand, the African Union has appointed 5 prominent African personalities as envoys for its COVID-19 mitigation strategy to work. The envoys are tasked to operate globally as well.
The 5 special envoys, they are working with the international monetary institutions, IMF and World Bank, G20. They are working on having a debt relief for our member states in Africa, especially the poor countries. They are working on having a moratorium on paying the interest and having more loans and more funds to our member states to make sure that our economies will not be hardly hit by this COVID-19.
In Africa, the coronavirus is said to have a case fatality rate of about 2.8%. The good news is the recovery rate of COVID-19 patients in this continent is one of the highest in the world. Experts say if the continent can tackle the economic impacts of the pandemic, it can come out of the woods sooner than later. Group DRC CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Across Africa, COVID-19 positive cases are on the rise. But physical distancing is not a luxury everyone can afford while struggling to make a living. CGTN's Nick Mudima reports on the situation at one Kenyan market.
So I'm right in the middle of a market known as Gikomba here in Nairobi, Kenya, and here business is as usual. Actually, the market is back to factory settings. Let's talk to some of the people who feel like indeed whether it's time to go back to the markets because it's full to the brim.
People are back, but not fully. Others have decided to come back and look for their children's welfare because people are broke and business is down. Everything is expensive now. We are pleading with the authorities to reduce the prices.
Safety is not assured, but it's good for people to continue the precautions so they can protect themselves from the coronavirus. The market is full because of people's condition. People have realized staying in the house won't help them with food and other essentials, and now they have to come out and make ends meet, and that's why the market is full.
Even the transport sector, it is actually booming because so many drivers, especially those who actually deal with luggage, are doing so well, but again, they do not fear that COVID-19 is actually sparking into the country. The numbers are actually going up.
No one now fears COVID-19. According to the Ministry of Health, people are to be given permission to go home before getting well. Does the virus still exist?
People don't believe this virus exists because no one has helped them. This mask is $50. I'm paid $3 a day. I have to use close to $1 as my fare back home. Will I buy the mask or what should I do?
It's also very busy for the second-hand clothes vendors. It's a sea of second-hand clothes here.
In my opinion, I see like everyone is free here, and the numbers have strangely increased compared to other days.
People are coming out very clearly and of course in large numbers to make sure they are actually fending for their families. My name is Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
In the United Kingdom, all people arriving into the country are now required to self-isolate for 14 days. It's part of government efforts to guard against a second wave of the coronavirus as the economy slowly reopens. All arriving passengers are required to fill in a contact form online, providing information of their travels and self-isolation accommodation, while a spokesman for Prime Minister Boris Johnson reported a good level of compliance. There's also a lot of public skepticism about the new rules.
Does it mean you self-isolating 2 weeks? Is it going to be a problem at all?
No, not at all. But I think the problem here is it's from here to home. I'm going to use a public transport. So if I'm a carrier now, then how would they control it? How would you know if I've spread it to anyone else? So there's no track of that at all. And then it's just filling up a form, but the bus was full of us, so all the plane was in the bus, even though before we get to the flight they say keep your social distance, keep your mask on and all that stuff, but the bus was literally 30 centimeters between all of us.
Apparently people are not informed that you need to fulfill an online form before you come here. I've seen maybe 5 people who came. The rest they didn't do it, so that will delay the time that they'll pass it. And we're lucky that there are not many people traveling, but meanwhile, if there are more, this will be a problem.
The United States President Donald Trump recently announced he was ending the relationship between his country and the World Health Organization. He has continually criticized the WHO during the COVID-19 pandemic. This decision has provoked reactions from around the world. Let's get the perspective of some African experts in the following report.
Like many experts around the world, those in Africa say they are not surprised by President Trump's decision to sever ties with the World Health Organization. US contributions to the global health body are an estimated 15% of the organization's budget. Trump says the withdrawn funds will be redirected to what he calls other urgent and deserving global public health needs.
Given the American president's first statement with the WHO, his diplomatic line and the decision he has taken with regards to the agreement with Iran and the Paris Climate Agreement, I believe that this decision is in line with his diplomatic line, which he calls the American force.
It turns out that this decision can have enormous consequences because the American contribution is directed towards the fight against certain diseases such as HIV and diabetes in Africa and the Middle East.
Meanwhile, African experts have welcomed China's willingness to strengthen its support to the WHO, while others stress the importance of national and continental efforts.
Now we need more accountability at the level of African countries. From now on, every African head of state must absolutely make equipping our health infrastructures and the health of the population a major priority.
An African health organization should be created, which will enable certain epidemic or pandemic situations to be rapidly managed upstream while awaiting the input of the WHO. The two organizations could even collaborate. It is important for Africa to be strategically independent in the fight against epidemics.
The exit by the US considerably reduces the WHO's budget and possibly threatens aid to some developing countries. The WHO is working to make up for this financial deficit to be able to continue with its programs aimed at safeguarding global public health. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Let's head over to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The World Health Organization has reported a dozen more Ebola cases, 9 confirmed and 3 suspected. Of these, 6 have already died. The cases were reported in and around the city of Bandaka. It's part of a new outbreak in the northwest Equateur province and is separate from the one in the east that has been going on since 2018. Researchers suspect this new outbreak could be the result of a spillover event. This means that transmission may have been from an infected animal. The WHO said 300 people have been vaccinated so far in Bandaka and the surrounding province. The new case marks the country's 11th major Ebola outbreak since the virus was reported in the DRC in 1976. It also marks the Central African nation's 3rd Ebola outbreak in 2 years. The United States has been rocked by protests over the death of George Floyd for nearly 2 weeks. Police in the city of Seattle have fired flashbangs and pepper spray to disperse crowds on the street. Some protesters, however, stood their ground and tried to build a barricade. Police have warned demonstrators against violence. Floyd died on May the 25th in Minneapolis after an officer kept kneeling on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. Members and supporters of South Africa's opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, have joined global anti-racism demonstrations. Protesters gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria to condemn the death of George Floyd.
Supporters of the South Africa's left-wing Economic Freedom Fighters marched in solidarity with the current global Black Lives Matter anti-racism agitations. Led by EFF's leader Julius Malema, the demonstrators knelt in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. This was a symbolic gesture that has been adopted by worldwide anti-racism protests.
The Americans were with us during difficult times. The anti-apartheid movement in the USA, led by our own black Americans. And when they are going through such a difficult period, it is important that we too, pay solidarity with them.
Nearly 300 people rallied in Pretoria, carrying placards while chanting slogans such as "Down with Racism," "Down with Donald Trump," and "Down with Imperialism."
We are here showing solidarity, in sending a strong message, saying that lives of black people is important. It mustn't be taken for granted. And what is happening in America and globally should stop as a matter of agency.
More protests took place outside U.S. consulates in Johannesburg and Cape Town.
It's important for me to be here and to support my black brothers and sisters and to call out white people and to show that there's a lack of support and they need to step up and they need to show up.
So we need to rise up as black people and unite and in solidarity. We are here in solidarity of all black people. Doesn't matter where it happened, here in South Africa or America, anyone, but you are here in solidarity with them.
Everywhere, black man,
Dozens of people have in recent days attended anti-racism protests called across South Africa following George Floyd's death. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
Protests over the death of George Floyd have been spreading across the world, and it's reigniting a global conversation on police brutality and racial inequality. CGTN's Astatal sat down with one African-American family in Kenya to see how they are tackling these topics with their children.
Here in Kenya, African-American families continue to watch the developments of the ongoing U.S. protest. While they may be far away, the topics of police brutality and racial inequality are ones they're all too familiar with. To explore this, I sat down with a Piper family. Ben Piper comes from the U.S. city of Cleveland. For the last 13 years, he has called both Ethiopia and Kenya home. As he raises his family outside of the U.S., Ben is always aware of the obstacles they may face if they ever choose to live in America.
My friends and I have had several circumstances where we've had unpleasant, to say the least, interactions with police, and we learn as a young person in the U.S. how to manage that, how to code switch and sound professional and educated so they treat you differently. And so now from here, trying to have those conversations with my sons who understand America, but not really, and I haven't had that kind of interpersonal interaction with the police, which has been so unpleasant, but it's an important thing for them to learn in case they decide to go back to the U.S.
Ben and his wife Lily say they keep up with the ongoing protest as a family. The members of the Piper family aren't the only ones paying attention to what's going on in the U.S. From Ghana to Kenya and in between, solidarity protests have emerged. But this is nothing new. Africa and Black America have a long history of supporting each other's civil rights movements. To better understand this history, I sat down with Professor Nyambi Carter. Professor Carter, thanks for joining me. So, Black America has a long history of supporting Africa throughout its various civil rights movements. Can you give me an example of this?
In South Africa, where we saw apartheid continue well into the 1990s, you had Black people in this country having, South African scholars, for example, come teach in exile at HBCUs in the United States. You had the Free South Africa movement holding protests in DC and all around this country. And I think it's also important to remember when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison after many, many years, one of the places he came was to the United States.
It's this history of solidarity and action which Lily says she has taught her children throughout the years. Her eldest daughter is heading to the U.S. for her university education, and Lily hopes the lessons helped prepare her.
Yeah, it's very possible that when she goes to the United States, her identity will be reduced down to a singular story. But as parents, we've tried to really root her in all the parts of what is beautiful about being Black, her Ethiopian roots, her Cleveland roots.
Lily and Ben are preparing their children for a set of challenges different from their white American counterparts. Ben says he hopes the tools they've given their children will prepare them for the world. Astatal, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. We've got a lot more stories coming your way after the break. Here's a look at what's ahead. Libyan leaders applauded for accepting to resume negotiations for a political solution. And we'll tell you about the upsurge of visitors to one of South Africa's iconic tourist attractions.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for tuning in. The United Nations Special Mission in Libya has welcomed the acceptance from the Libyan leaders to resume the 5+5 military talks. The UN was pursuing 3 tracks to end the conflict in Libya through military, economic, and political negotiations. Over the weekend, Egypt put forward its own peace initiative for Libya. It also called for a ceasefire starting today ahead of the UN-sponsored talks. Here is Adel Al-Mahroui with more.
Another hope for Libya to pave a comprehensive political roadmap emerges. The United Nations Support Mission in Libya says it's encouraged by the recent acceptance of Libyan leaders to resume talks. Starting June 8th, the Libyan National Army should abide to a ceasefire which Cairo has called for.
We are now in a test for goodwill. It is also a proof to the commitment of all parties to the principle of preserving Libya's unity. That is, of course, based on the abidance of all parties to a ceasefire and respect to international agreements previously agreed. The LNA forces now stand at their position before their Tripoli offensive began last year. Now the international community must help out to preserve what has been reached.
The head of the Libyan government of national accord, Fayez Sarraj, has repeatedly called for an LNA retreat before resuming the UN's 5+5 military talks. He has managed to push them back last week. But as the GNA is backed by several groups and foreign fighters, Al-Sarraj might not be able to enforce any agreement on the ground.
The LNA says it is ready for the 5+5 military talks based on the Cairo declaration, which Al-Sarraj has not responded to. But there is an issue here. Who are the people to join these talks? The Presidential Council is backed by militias and now foreign leaders. So are we going to see Turkish officers on the round table with the LNA representatives? I don't think that is either realistic or effective.
Khalifa Haftar, the commander of the LNA, still insists on disarming the militias and giving his forces the task of maintaining security in Libya. It's a demand Al-Sarraj has rejected and has destined many previous agreements to failure.
UNSMIL has warned that any war between Libyans is a losing war and will only inflict heavy losses on the North African nation. Meanwhile, the fate of its 5+5 military talks depend on the success of the international calls for another ceasefire. Adel Al-Mahroui, CGTN, Ras Sedr, Egypt.
Most schools in South Africa have reopened. Students in their final years of primary and secondary schooling returned to their respective institutions 3 months after they were shut due to the coronavirus pandemic. Learners are back under stringent hygiene and physical distancing guidelines. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South African children braved the cold weather and restarted school under strict COVID-19 protocols. The first morning was not without hiccups, as students were screened, scanned and sanitized before being let in.
They were still fixing the toilets and water was stopped, but for fixing. As far as provision of sanitizers in all the blocks, that's in place and that's good. In terms of your other requirements, your scanners that they do have, but I'm sure you saw they have a problem with the affected by the weather somehow, so that will have to be addressed as well. The social distancing in the class I'm satisfied with. It's 20 students per class.
With the outbreak worsening, parents are anxious.
I feel nervous about all this, but I have to calm down so that he does the same also. So he mustn't panic. So I need to support him and be there and just let him know that everything will be okay.
This pandemic is really scary, and then I'm nervous, but I think my children must come back to school because this academic year is very important for them. Even though I'm nervous, but something must be done at the end of the day.
There were no hugs and handshake on the first day of school, but learners who've been home for 3 months were glad to be back.
I'm feeling happy because we have long time at home, and at home we can't learn anything.
I'm happy to be back at school because at home the only thing I was doing is watching TV with my cousins, and my cousins used to go out and my parents used to tell them not to go out, but I'm happy to be back at school.
Private schools had a little more time to settle in with the help of technology.
So the QR code is our screening tool that all the boys have downloaded and the teachers have downloaded. Everyone is on the same database, so they they tick all their symptoms, and then they come in and then we scan their QR code. If there is a child who is not well, we take the child to the COVID clinic, where we further screen them and assess them.
So it's been a very trying time both for the boys and the staff, and they found it emotionally difficult, and they found the uncertainty quite emotionally difficult. And so we need to keep on speaking to them, reassuring them as best we can. This year is certainly not lost, and we have a draft timetable for the matric exams from IAB, which is just slightly delayed.
1.6 million learners are returning to their classrooms this week. This will pave the way for the rest of the academic year and how other grades will be phased in the coming months. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Staying in South Africa, one of the 7 natural wonders of the world is now welcoming back tourists. Table Mountain National Park has been closed for weeks due to a national lockdown. CGTN's Travers Andrews caught up with some of the visitors flocking back to the national park.
It's a view that is famous around the world. But for the last few weeks, Cape Townians could only enjoy it from the comfort of their homes. But that's at least until now. The Table Mountain National Park has been reopened due to the lowering of lockdown restrictions, and visitors have been descending on this majestic mountain in their numbers. For some, it's been a long time coming.
It was amazing. It was good to be out for the first time, and it was very quiet, but it was so peaceful and really good. You don't have to, I don't know. You can keep your distance and be cautious with your masks, I guess, each time you pass people.
And with such a huge mountain range to explore, it is one place where social distancing can certainly be adhered to.
Everybody is happy that we can exercise again, we can go out. So on the other hand, masks are compulsory. So in the last 3 or 4 months, if anybody watched the news, it has been drummed into keep your distance, wear a mask, well, sanitize and all the spiel. Now everybody is happy to be out here.
But authorities are keeping a close eye on the mandatory wearing of masks so that everyone can be kept safe. And the string of good weather days has also kept the trails busy. Now, Table Mountain's reopening has also become a key hotspot for tourists while waiting for the skies to reopen.
Came here for holiday for 2.5 weeks, and then with the lockdown, I'm been stuck here for 3 months. I'm waiting for a flight. I've heard a lot about this walk, and today being a perfect day to do the walk, so we came all the way from Camps Bay, and we did that to enjoy it. The weather is perfect. So
for now, the Table Mountain Cableway station still remains closed, but there are many routes to the top. All it takes is a bit of effort, and with views like this, it's easy to see why so many people are drawn to this beloved icon of the city. Travers Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
For decades, infrastructure changes in Kenya have been targeting motorists. But with the reality of COVID-19, the capital Nairobi is resetting its approach to urban development. CGTN's Robert Nagila reports.
Many of the streets in Nairobi have some form of construction going on. Kenya's capital is receiving a long overdue makeover with the needs of pedestrians and cyclists as a priority. The works being undertaken by the local and national governments seeks to achieve two things: elevate Nairobi's infrastructure to international standards and make it easier for the public to follow social distancing guidelines. Dozens of parking spaces have disappeared, and in their place, new wide pedestrian walkways and cycling lanes. A new authority, the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, established by the president, has been mandated to rehabilitate the capital with a military man at its helm.
I have been given almost 23 items to accomplish. Some have been given 100 days to showcase that they are implementable, and we have already started.
And with military precision, the capital is slowly being transformed. Beginning with the central business district, the new walkways and cycling lanes will cover about 100 kilometers and have provisions for people with disabilities. The authority was established after the city's flamboyant governor was charged with corruption.
He has legal challenges. He cannot execute some of those functions, and that's why some of these functions have been handed over.
And plans are also underway to upgrade informal settlements. The president is personally overseeing the rehabilitation. CCTV footage has emerged of President Kenyatta inspecting the changes during a dusk to dawn curfew. As the government fights to control the spread of the pandemic, it's also using this period to bring about much-needed change to improve the quality of life. Robert Magila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
And here's a recap of our top stories. The African Union unveils a new partnership to accelerate COVID-19 testing in Africa. South Africans demonstrate against racism in solidarity with protesters in the U.S. and other parts of the world. And Libyan leaders applauded for accepting to resume negotiations for a political solution. And now to an inspiring story of transforming challenges into opportunities. A Tanzanian teen has recently developed an exam app that helps primary school students test their knowledge. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala takes a closer look at this innovation.
Moses Rogers Mbanga is a 14-year-old software developer. He has been exhibiting his new app to the public.
Basically the normal kid stuff. The games, movies or anything, but not developing specifically. Well, mostly friends and family, mostly relatives. They've been encouraging me and telling me that this is good for you, because I had interest in IT, but not specifically developing, because I didn't know what it is. So after a lot of influence from friends and family, I decided to get into it, and here I am.
Moses launched his ExamNet app on the 1st of May. His aim was to help grade 7 learners prepare for their final exams set for September.
Well, ExamNet basically started with the idea of not getting enough tests or not getting enough preparation for the final exams, to help them get more exercises, to help them develop more skills so that they can accomplish better grades in the final exams. That was the initial idea. But now, since COVID outbreak, we've had a lot of users as they're now at home. Not only the grade 7 students, but also the other grades. It has helped them a lot.
But maintaining the productivity of the app has proven to be quite a challenge, especially because Moses needs to handle both schoolwork and coding.
Myself and his mother, we've never been worried about studies. Whenever he comes home, he has some homework, he will not do anything. He will not even eat until he finishes his homework.
I have classes from Monday to Friday. It's basically half the day. So the rest of the day I have time to finish my schoolwork. Then after that I can do some developing. Whenever you have a bug, you try to ask yourself what happened. You actually can't take a real nap.
Tests in English and 20 in Kiswahili. It tests maths, science, social studies, Kiswahili and English. The tests were prepared by a team of qualified teachers and cross-checked by another team of moderators.
For now, it's free, as you said, but after some time, there's going to be a subscription fee of approximately 3,000 to 5,000 per student, with a panel of special teachers, which we have authors and moderators. So the authors actually make the questions, and then they put them in the moderators panel, whereby the moderators actually go by the questions and make sure they've met all the standards, grammatically okay, and other small error checks. So a total of 40 tests are uploaded in the app every week.
Mbaga is supported by the National Examinations Council of Tanzania, as well as the Commission of Science and Technology and the Tanzania Education Authority. The ExamNet app is available on Play Store for download. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
The news continues on Africa Live. Time now for our business segment with Uche.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, Sudan begins talks for a bailout from the IMF in the face of rising inflation. And oil prices open the week at a high after OPEC Plus agrees on production cuts.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Sudan. The country has begun talks with the International Monetary Fund on a non-funded program that could pave the way for international financial support. Now, Finance Minister Ibrahim El-Badawi said that Khartoum is in desperate need of financial help in order to reorganize its economy. Now, inflation has been running at nearly 100%. The currency is tumbling as the government prints money to subsidize bread, fuel, and electricity. The talks with the IMF mark a thaw in Sudan's relationship with the fund. Until now, it has been unable to tap the IMF or the World Bank for support. Sudan is still listed by the United States as a state sponsor of terrorism and has about $1.3 billion of IMF arrears. Now, the U.S. said it was willing to work to remove Sudan from the terrorism list after the removal of President Omar al-Bashir from power in April last year. And Egypt Air is negotiating with the National Bank of Egypt and Bank Misr to obtain a $185,000 loan. Egypt Air CEO Mohamed Roshdi revealed that the loan will pay external debts which were incurred during the coronavirus crisis. The external debts have so far risen to over $800,000. Egypt Air has been recording losses amounting to nearly $62,000 per month since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis. The government has said it will support the state-owned Egypt Air until it returns to 80% of its 2019 operations. Now, back in early April, the International Air Transport Association estimated that Egypt's airline industry may face potential losses in revenues of about $1.6 billion in 2020. Egypt suspended international flights in mid-March to counter the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, South African banks are facing the steepest earnings slump in half a century, with some posting losses, of course, as measures to curb the coronavirus drag the economy deeper into recession. Now, the measures have also led to a surge in bad debts. Auditing and consultancy firm PwC in Johannesburg says there have been nothing this severe in the last 50 odd years. Now, PwC also adds that the potential drop in gross domestic product is bigger than any of the previous stresses. Only one of the big four banks has reported an adjusted net income loss since 1992, and that's according to Bloomberg data. That was in 2003 when Nedbank Group set aside more money for taxes. It wrote down its technology investments and changed accounting policies. Now, Standard Bank Group reported its sole annual profit decline in 2010 in the wake of the global financial crisis, while First Rand's earnings shrank in 2008 and 2009. Now, the world's major oil producers have agreed to extend the record oil production cuts that have helped bolster oil prices since their collapse in April. Oil ministers from the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Nations, as well as other producers, led by Russia, reached an agreement to continue cutting 9.7 million barrels a day. That's about 10% of global output in normal times. Now, the cuts will continue through July under the original agreement reached on April 12th by OPEC Plus cartel. Production was set to increase in steps after June. The decision on further deep production cuts shows that despite the recent surge in oil prices, the large producers remain concerned about the market's vulnerability. OPEC's next ordinary meeting will be in the Austrian capital of Vienna on November 30th, while the non-OPEC joint ministerial meeting to review market conditions will convene on June 18th. Meanwhile, the African Development Bank has mobilized a loan of 180 million euros in favor of Tunisia to finance the program to support the response to COVID-19 through social inclusion and employment. The program is called Paris, and Paris's immediate objective is to strengthen the country's health response and to mitigate the socio-economic impact of the crisis.
The funds approved by the Board of Directors of the African Development Bank will support the North African state's effort against COVID-19. In addition, it will help Tunisian authorities to cope with the economic and social consequences of this unprecedented sanitary crisis.
The African Development Bank is helping Tunisia at a critical stage. The country has many economic and social problems. The African dimension of this loan is important. It shows the solidarity of African lenders with the countries facing the negative repercussions of the crisis.
Moreover, a considerable sum will be transferred to the Ministry of Social Affairs. It will provide social coverage and immediate assistance for more than 2 million vulnerable individuals, including 140,000 low-income pensioners.
Women and children, as well as low-income pensioners and vulnerable families and businesses, need this direct financial assistance because they have been suffering for 3 months. However, the state needs to mobilize more resources because the extent of the economic and social damage is catastrophic.
The Tunisian parliament has approved the 180 million euro fund, as well as the government support to the vulnerable population. The cabinet of Elias El-Farfar has granted an exceptional allowance to 623,000 families with limited income, 350,000 private sector employees affected by the crisis, and 10,000 workers who lost their jobs.
The partnership between Tunisia and the African Development Bank has been going on for almost 50 years, covering different sectors, including health, human development, energy, water, transport, agriculture, and the financial sector. The new loan strengthens this partnership.
The African Development Bank program will also enable 230,000 small farmers, more than 320,000 employees, and around 50,000 self-employed workers and artisans to keep their jobs. The mobilized funds will help save 400 Tunisian exporting enterprises and 250,000 private businesses from bankruptcy. It will also enhance early detection through the use of rapid screening tests for more than 450,000 people. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And in Kenya, Tuskegee supermarket chain is slowly sliding into financial headwinds. The retailer has failed to pay its suppliers. Trade Cabinet Secretary Betty Maina said the chain, which is operated by Tusker Mattresses, is now on the ministry's watch list for failing to meet its contractual obligations. The government says early intervention in the retailer's precarious situation will avert the collapse of the supermarket, which employs almost 6,000 workers and operates over 63 branches in Kenya and Uganda. In 2018, the once giant retailer in the region, Nakumatt, collapsed and entered into a voluntary administration in order to protect itself from creditors it owed over $300 million. Well, that is all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up ahead on Global Business Africa, Nigeria rolls out the eagerly awaited stimulus package, focusing on agricultural production as well as other sectors. Of course, more on that coming up at top of the hour. For now, it is back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. The news continues on Africa Live. We've got so much amazing stories coming your way. Stay tuned. Here's a look at what's ahead. An alphabet system for the Fulani community developed by two Guinean brothers spreads across the Sahel region.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. With the aim of facilitating communications and immortalizing the pure language, two Guinean brothers have produced an alphabet for the nomadic Fulani community. This linguistic group straddles the Sahel region from Sudan to Senegal. The alphabet is now taught in many West African countries.
This is what the Adlam alphabet looks like. Composed of 28 letters and 10 numerals, it is written from right to left. Courses on the syllabary are offered free of charge at various learning centers across Guinea.
I discovered the Adlam alphabet thanks to a master, and since I started learning this script, I have learned a lot. For example, before there were words I could not pronounce, but today I pronounce them well. Here, I have learned a lot about my culture.
Every man, every creature must learn the alphabet of this community because it will serve him. China, for example, did not have its own script, so she fought for her own writing and was given an identity. The Adlam script is not intended for one community, but anyone can use it. Many of the students in class, for example, are not Fulani, but are learning the language anyway.
In addition to the 28 letters used to write Fulani, the Adlam alphabet has 6 additional letters that are used to write all the other languages of Guinea and West Africa.
Speaking of the creation of the Adlam alphabet, we think it has an extremely positive impact. Indeed, Adlam not only makes communication easier, but also facilitates the writing of the Fulani language.
Adlam is a very useful script today, as the script is already integrated into new information technology systems, whether in mobile phones, computers or iPads. Today, you can write with Adlam as you'll do, for example, with French, English or Arabic.
Created in 1989, the alphabet is considered today as the curator of the Fulani civilization. It is also taught in Nigeria, Sudan, Cameroon, Gambia, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and even the United States. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
Well, stay tuned for your sports news on Africa Live. Here's a look at the headlines. Former IAAF President Lamine Diack arrives in a Paris court to face corruption charges.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Sport on Africa Live. Let's start with athletics, where Lamine Diack, the former head of World Athletics governing body, arrived in court in Paris on Monday to stand trial on charges of corruption, money laundering, and breach of trust linked to a Russian doping scandal. Prosecutors allege Diack, who turned 87 on Sunday, solicited $3.9 million from athletes suspected of doping to cover up the allegations and allow them to continue competing, including in the 2012 London Olympics. Diack from Senegal led the governing International Association of Athletics Federations, now renamed World Athletics, from 1999 to 2015, and was among the most influential men in the sport. He lives under house arrest in Paris and faces a jail sentence of up to 10 years if convicted. The trial had been due to start in January, but was postponed after new documents containing testimony from his son and co-defendant Papa Massata Diack were submitted to the court. Senegal has refused to extradite Papa Massata, who worked as a marketing consultant for the IAAF.
I would have been the vice president of the IAAF for 35 years, and I would be of the age to take care of my grandchildren. You know, I have a small tribe in Senegal, and I'd like to take care of them a bit. There are some federations, some members of the council who told me, you have to continue, you have to be there for the centenary. The centenary is next year.
World men's 1,500-meter champion Timothy Cheruiyot will lead a team of 5 Kenyan runners in a virtual 2,000 meters exhibition race as part of the Impossible Games, a behind-closed-doors Oslo Diamond League event on Thursday. The Kenyans, who will be running in Nairobi, will compete against a squad led by the trio of renowned Norwegian Ingebrigtsen brothers, Jacob, Philip, and Henrik, in Oslo. CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar tells us more.
Rongai Athletics Club, home of Kenyan world men's 1,500-meter champion Timothy Cheruiyot, has stepped up training for the delayed start of the international outdoor athletics season in August. But ahead of the resumption of post-COVID-19 competition, they have accepted a virtual challenge from the Norwegian trio of Ingebrigtsen brothers.
Meetings nowadays are on virtual. Nobody goes to the boardroom. But what happened to the sports? So we are trying a different normal by having a virtual competition, competing at different stadiums.
Dubbed the Impossible Games, the Maori Plant Memorial Race on the 11th of June will see Team Cheruiyot run behind closed doors at the Nyayo National Stadium in Nairobi to take on the Ingebrigtsen brothers, who will be running in Oslo, Norway, in a virtual 2,000-meter race.
We're going to be running without fans in the stadium. That's one challenge. We're also going to be running at a very high altitude here in Nairobi compared to them in Oslo. But we always believe in our training, and we're very confident we'll overcome all these challenges.
Coach Bernard Ouma relishes the middle-distance rivalry between his Chargers and the Ingebrigtsen brothers, Jacob, Philip and Henrik, and says their threat should not be underrated.
History doesn't forget. We've done a lot of competitions with the Norwegian brothers. Right from under 18, he was beaten by George Manangoi. Under 20, he was again beaten by George Manangoi. The Diamond League, Timothy has been winning since 2016. The World Championship, we won again. This is the same people we are competing with. That doesn't mean that they can't beat us, but they have to dig very deep.
Cheriot is excited to be running alongside close friend and training partner, the 2017 World 1500-meter champion Elijah Manangoi, who will be returning to the track for the first time since his lengthy injury layoff.
I believe in my team. First of all, I'm so happy that Elijah Manangoi is back. He's recovered very well from his injury and looks very strong. I also have Edwin Melly, who has been in camp for 3 months. So he's in good shape and the whole team is in great shape, really, including the pacemakers.
June 11th will witness a unique race here at the Nyayo National Stadium as the two teams compete thousands of miles apart. For the men's 1500-meter world champion Timothy Cheriot and his team, this will be another perfect opportunity to remind the Norwegian Ingebrigtsen brothers and the world that this event still belongs to Kenya. Mohamed Abubakar for CGTN, Nairobi.
The NASCAR community has put on an emotional display